On this episode of What's on My Workbench, I'm going to be building this messenger bag. I hope you enjoy and follow along. So to get started on this messenger bag, I have cut a strip of Crazy Horse leather. This is 2 to 3 ounce brown Crazy Horse. I cut it 17 inches by 36 inches to the main body. I've cut it longer than I want and a little wider than I want, so that once I get the layers done, I can get it trimmed to the actual size. The Crazy Horse leather, as I said, is 2 to 3 ounces. I cut the main body and I cut a strip that I will cut in half and make 2 side panels out of it. I've also cut a strip of this pretty dark blue goat skin leather. This leather here is less than an ounce, and I've cut 2 panels that will be used to line the main body. One piece will be the body that makes the pouch that will be the main part of the bag, and then I've got a strip here that will overlap that and get attached here that will be for the flap. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to use the 3M 77 spray adhesive. I'll spray both parts. I'll get them laminated back up, and then when I've got that done, then I'll come back to you for the next step. So now that I've got spray adhesive on both pieces of leather, and I let it tack up much like you would do contact cement, I'm going to take this liner, and you probably can't see it on it, but I put a faint pencil mark on here to line up on, and I'm going to line it up on that pencil mark. Across here. And then I'm going to smooth this down, trying to keep from having a bunch of wrinkles in it. And towards the other end. I ran just slightly crooked, so I'm off this edge just a bit, but I'm going to be trimming this piece to size. So that's one reason why I overcut it, is to allow me to fix anything such as that. And then I'm going to take the next piece and layer that on here, going the other direction. And I'm going to overlap this about 1/4 to 1/2 of an inch, and then that'll be a stitch line established going the other way. Check my line here, straighten up my overlap just a little bit. As you can see, it wants to stick once it gets there. Not quite as permanent when you first set it down as contact cement can be, but it's pretty close. All right, got the edge there. Now I'll work these wrinkles out here in the beginning. See, it sticks pretty good once you get pressure on it. And work this down. There we go. So we've got those layered up. I'll do the same thing with the side panel, and then we'll get her cut to size. Next, I'm going to take my straight edge. I've been asked, how do you keep it from shifting? I've got a non-slip tape here on the back, and that helps keep the leather from walking on you or moving as you trim it. And I'm going to trim this kind of down to the size I need here on this side. I was off a little bit more on this side, so I'm going to take more off of this side in the width of it. And then I will cut down along here. Don't worry if you don't cut all the way through all the leather in one pass. You can come back and make another cut at it and clean it up. So I'm going to do that to the other side as well here and trim it to length. So now I have my blank cut to width. And it's 16.5 inches wide to accommodate the computer that I'm making it for. This piece here will end up being the front edge of the pocket of the bag. And what I'm going to do on this is I'm going to cut the leather long enough to fold over and create a finished edge here. So I need about 1/2 inch. So I'm going to go 1/2 inch past the main body of leather, and I'm going to trim that off. And then one of the first things I will do will be to sew this liner into place along the top of the bag like that. It'll give it a nice finished edge instead of this edge. These are chrome tan leathers, and so the edges of those do not burnish like a veg tan leather would do. Now I have it cut to size. I want to fold back this liner. It'll show on the outside of the bag. Well, it'll be under the flap, but when you have the bag open, you'll see that. This will give it that finished edge. I'm using some double-sided tape here. I bought this through Buckle Guy. It's called Ted's tape. So it's a double-sided permanent adhesive. It's on this Crazy Horse, which is kind of oily and waxy, so it wouldn't hold it on its own, but with the stitching I'm going to put in there, it'll be strong enough to hold it until I get it stitched in place. As you can see, sometimes a little aggravating removing the protective part here to expose the adhesive. And now that I get this removed here, I'm going to work this leather over onto the body of the bag, trying to keep the reveal the same across here. Try to keep from getting too many wrinkles in it. This project's going to have kind of an aged look to it, but obviously I don't want to work a bunch of that into the bag. And I will roll this down here. And now that I have that done, I will take and mark. Let me get that out of the way first. I'm going to mark. I've got this mark to put a line here. I'm going to put a double row of stitching across here. So this is for the first one. So I got my first row of stitching holes put in. I've marked it again. I just moved the gauge over to a wider spacing, and then I scribed down through there and marked it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the stitching chisel across here again. And this will give me the holes needed to do the hand sewing. And I'm going to do this as a saddle stitch. Like many of the other videos you've seen my stitching, I'll do it as a saddle stitch along here. So I'll get these holes marked and get set up to stitch, and then I'll come back to you. Now that I have the leather, I have all my stitching holes installed, I'm going to use some Tiger Ritza. I'm going to use the 0.06 thread, and I'm going to do a saddle stitch along the edge here. So I'll equal these threads up here. And the saddle stitch, you've probably seen that on some other videos, but you use 2 needles, one coming from each side, and it makes a very strong stitch line that goes along the top edge of the bag. Next, I'm going to work on the side panels and then the assembly of these to the side panels. Okay, so I'm going to work on the side panels. I've got a strip here, it's Crazy Horse and the goat skin. And the first thing I want to do is get the panels cut out of this. The side panels are going to be 11 inches long. I'm going to start off with a square here along the side of the Crazy Horse leather, and I'm just going to square up this end here to start with. And then I need 11 inches. I'll measure down here 11 inches, and I'll use my awl and just put a little mark on here. And then I'll cut this to length as well. This will end up being one of my panels. And then my second panel here will be 11 inches. On this end, I'll put a little mark here. And this will be where I cut this one to length. Okay, so now I've got my two panels, side panels cut to length. Now I want my side panels to be 4 inches by 11, but I'm going to put a taper from the bottom to the top. I think that'll help keep the top closed a little bit. So I'm going to taper this in by 1/2 inch on each side, and that'll give just a little bit of a taper. Now the panel is cut, the width of the panel is cut to 4 inches, and then by the time I get my seam allowance there, I'll end up with a panel that is a little more than 3 inches at the bottom there. And close to 2.5 inches at the top. Now that's on the side, it's a flexible bag, so there'll be plenty of room to get it open to use the bag. So I'm going to do this to the second one here, and I will come back here to finish the panels. This is going to be the hardware I'm going to use on the bag. It's going to be a natural brass, and I've cut 2 strips, 1 inch by about 6 inches of the Crazy Horse leather. Now, it's pretty strong, but I want to make sure, since this is what's going to be carrying the messenger bag, and as a result, probably a computer in there, I want to make sure it's strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue some nylon backing to the inside of this where it's going to be folded back on itself. And that will give it some additional backing and as a result support. And with the contact adhesive, I'll just put a little bit here on the back in the middle of that. And then I will do the same thing on the back of this. And the glue is really just kind of hold it all together, keep it from shuffling out the side, and keep it in place until I get the bag assembled. Once I get the bag assembled, it'll be sewn in place, and then I'll use some fasteners to fasten the strap to the side panel, and that will serve as further support for that. And I use just a scrap of cardboard here, so I'm not trying to clean adhesive off of my countertop. So I'll set these here and let that contact adhesive dry up until it is tacky, and then I will move to the next step. Now we're ready to put this liner in place, and I will just line it up here with the center of the strap and center length end to end, and glue these in here. And that will add considerable strength to this strap. Keep it from stretching and from tearing. So then this will go on here like that and fold over and attach to the side panel of the bag. And I've measured, I'm going to be 1.5 inches down and 1.5 inches in, and that is where this will attach. I'll cut it to length, put a couple of Chicago screws in here, and then I will actually sew it in place as well. So I'll come back once I've got that completed and show you what that looks like. Now that I have the Chicago screw through the strap, I cut it to the length with an English point, and it's all installed. I'm gonna mark along the edge here so I know where to put my stitches, and this just helps keep a equal distance around the edge for this to follow with my stitching chisel. And I find when I have an English point, I always start at the tip and work my way back. So keeping my strap where I want it here, I will start with my first hole here, and then I'm going to check and make sure that it came through, and it did. Then I'm going to work up both sides here to the straightaway. Making sure that it lined up good. More. I'll switch over to my 6-stitch chisel. Overlap 3 holes because I don't need to come all the way to the top. Checking to make sure they come through. Otherwise I'll have to use a stitching awl when I get to that point of stitching. Got the, now I have the holes in for the stitches, front and back, and I will move my stitching pony and sew these in place. Now I'm ready to sew. I've got my same Tiger Ritza 0.06 thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start one hole down, and I'm going to go up to the top. And I'm going to go through here twice so that we have a little bit more thread at the top. Now I'm not overly worried about the thread being able to handle the job because I have Chicago screws in here holding it. So all of it working together, this is extremely strong. So the chances of making some type of an error and causing it to rip out pretty small. I get up here to the top. I want to put those same extra stitches in here as we did on the other side. Now that I have marked along here for 1/4 inch seam allowance, I'm going to put my stitching holes in using my stitching chisel, following that 1/4 inch seam allowance around here. Now I have the holes made in my side panels. I went ahead and put the holes across the top that I'll use later to put a binding type edge along the top. Now I need to mark down the side of this main body panel. I counted the holes around there. We have 123 holes. So I need to make 123 holes along this side. I'm gonna run down here where I think it'll, close to where it'll end. And I will start up here at the top. And I wanna make sure that I don't sever the stitches that I installed along the top. So I went ahead and put the first one between that pair at the top. And now I will work my way down. So there's 6, but you put one in back in the other hole to keep the spacing, so it's 5 per. So that's 5, 10. Now that I have the holes created for my stitches in the side panel and the body of the bag, I'm going to go ahead and start my stitching here. And I'm going to start here at the top. Obviously a good place to start. Let me equalize my threads out. Now I've gone up to the 0.8 Tiger Ritza thread for this part of it. You're not going to see these stitches, so you won't notice the difference in the weight of the thread, but it will add a little bit more in strength to this, because this part of the bag is doing real work. And I will start as I did before, down here 1. I'm going to come back through the top up here. There's potentially quite a bit of stress can be placed on this bag, so I want to make sure that the top is tacked in place really well. So I will continue here, and now I'm back even here, and I can continue on in the traditional saddle stitch along here. Now what I'm going to do is these 2 side panels, trying to get them in the stitching pony, it's kind of a challenge to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch down this side, and when it gets ready to turn and start getting the bag more into its shape, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to flip the body of the bag over, and I'm going to then stitch in the side panel on the other side to that point. So after we work our way down this edge and we work our way around the corner, you can see the bag start to take shape. This is probably more a task of patience than of skill. It just takes a little bit of time and tries your patience to get this in here. The straightaway part's not too bad. It's once we get to the corner and we're working our way around the corner that it really gets to be a challenge. This supple leather, it's harder to see where the hole is to put the thread through, as opposed to doing it on veg tan stiffer leather, because the hole doesn't really close right back up after you create it. Easier to follow along that way. So now that I've got most of the stitching done on these 2 end panels, I'm just finishing up this last little bit here. And I had someone ask me about the needles that I use. You can find needles at craft stores and such, and you probably find some that'll work there. I use these John James needles, and I get them from a couple different leather craft suppliers. The needle that I'm using on this soft leather for a bag does not have a overly sharp point on it. You can get some that are actually more rounded yet, but I find that some of those, the needle becomes thicker, and as a result of that, it's harder to get them through the holes. But the needle that I'm using on this soft leather has got somewhat of a rounded point on it. The needles that I use when I'm doing belts are a thinner needle, and it's got a sharper point on it. I don't necessarily need the sharper point, but I like the thinner needle, and that's because it's easier to pass the two needles by each other when I'm doing the stitching. When I get up here in this last bit, I'm going to leave this needle behind, and I'll show you why. I'll stitch through here to the top. Now this top part of the bag, it's going to get a lot more stress on it as people open and use the bag. So when I get to this top hole here, I'm going to go around that twice just to give it a little bit extra thread there, because this is probably the most stressed part of the whole bag, is that spot. Come through there twice, and then I'll work back down to this other needle. And the reason why I do that way is I don't want my knot to be all the way at the top. I want it down here a bit. And then to finish this off, if I come back a stitch and I pull these two pieces of leather kind of a little bit apart, I can come out through this needle through this to the center, and then I can do the same thing on this side. And I'm going to come out here between the two layers in the center. I can get her lined up in there because there's actually 4 layers, but it's between the two panels that I'm putting together. And then I'm just going to do a simple square knot there, right over left, left over right. And then I can trim that off here, and that knot won't be seen. And so it'll give a nice finished end to that part of the process. So now we've got the bag sewn together inside out. And you can start to see what the bag is going to look like.